Thank you very much indeed. It is my great privilege and pride to open for the Liberal Democrats on what is, in many ways, a historic day, and to speak as I do in my capacity as Deputy Convener for the Equalities and Human Rights Committee, who have brought this legislation to this point. When I was little, my grandfather got involved in amateur dramatics. He wasn't very good, but I say this because the role I remember him playing most was that of a judge in a play called Breaking the Code, about the life and trial of Alan Turing. And that was very important to my grandfather because he'd always thought of Alan Turing as a national hero. He felt that his intelligence work at Bletchley had turned the tide of the war in the North Atlantic, where my grandpa had been an officer on a destroyer. And he felt that despite this herodom, that Alan Turing had been terribly ill-used by both the British establishment and the judiciary in what happened to him, which ultimately brought about his destruction. So I think it's absolutely right that we grapple with this today, and I am grateful for the government for bringing it forward, because this bill is an opportunity for us as a parliament to say to those men who felt compelled to live in the shadows because of who they were, step forward and receive the justice that has been denied to you. This nation is profoundly sorry for the harm that it has done you. So this has been an amazing bill to be part of. I've really enjoyed the work of our committee in grappling with it, because the story of Alan Turing is reflected in those of thousands of men across these islands, both alive and dead. And each of them is steeped in persecution, in wrongful arrest, and sometimes in tragedy. And this is an opportunity for us to right a historic wrong. And I really want to pay tribute to the work of my fellow members, the clerks, Spice and researchers, but also those many people who gave us evidence as well. In particular, the LGBT rights organisations like Stonewall, Tim Hopkins in particular from the Equalities Network, who gave us an amazing discourse in the history of this legislation and what we could and couldn't do about it. And in particular, the two gentlemen who've been referenced who gave evidence in private. We learned from early doors that we can't just give an automatic disregard to everybody to whom this applies, for the reasons the Cabinet Secretary outlined. It is just too difficult to infer what was meant by breach of the peace or gross indecency when that offence was handed out. So a process of application it must be. But I would like to associate myself with the remarks of other members in this chamber who said that we should strive in the implementation of this bill to make that process far easier and less intrusive than it has been in other parts of the British Isles. We also learned that whilst there is indeed an impulse, an understandable impulse, to delete this entirely from our records, as I intervened on Annie Wells, that it would have the effect of creating a sort of revisionist history, that this is a stain on our national conscience. It is part of our fabric, and we need to remind future generations of what went before and the suffering of those it affected. We learned about the work of other countries, and in particular, I want to reference Germany, because I was very struck that in Germany, not only do they offer a pardon and a disregard, but they also give out a certificate and make a payment of compensation of a minimum of €4,000 in each case. And I explored this at every stage of our evidence-gathering process. I was keen to pursue that issue of compensation, given that we are actually only talking about perhaps 50 or so men coming forward in the Scottish context. To offer them financial recompense shouldn't be too onerous for the Scottish Government. However, I and the rest of the committee were very struck and indeed humbled by the quiet indifference of those people giving us evidence. This is not what this is about for them. And it never occurred to many of them. And it was, I think, is a measure of the character and the humble stoicism that they exhibited. In fact, in one case, one of the men who gave us evidence in the private session actually brought across a peal of laughter when I asked him if he felt compensation should be offered. And without missing a beat, he said, well, you can start by paying me my 40 shilling fine back that I got for loitering in a toilet. So I think to do so would create a subjective hierarchy of suffering. It's not what organisations or individuals are looking for. They are looking just for justice. So I want to reference also the work of a number of other members, in particular Mary Fee, and I was very struck by her line of questioning about how we extend this posthumously, the disregard element of this bill, to those families who want to seek the same level of justice that living people can attain. I also want to thank Jamie Green in particular for his work around a line of questioning on the Ministry of Defence, and the fact that in our armed services there are many men who are stripped of commission and rank and subjected to all kinds of abuse because of their sexuality. And we're very gratified to receive a very detailed response from the Ministry of Defence, which represents something of an open door that I'm sure that our committee will continue to push on. So as I said, Presiding Officer, this has been a lovely, lovely piece of legislation to work on. It's the kind of bill you come to Parliament to do. It makes your heart sing. And to meddle it with it by amendment at stage 2 is almost irresistible for opposition politicians, but I pledge to do very little of that, unless it's in the context of what we've described with Mary Fee's amendment. And can I finish then just by thanking again my colleagues on the committee for this great experience. It has been a great experience, and I think it's something my grandfather would be very proud of me for doing, because it was him that first gave me my insight, my first insight into the persecution that the LGBT plus community had suffered in these islands, and today we go some way to righting that wrong. Thank you.